We're going to start with an opening hymn. He lives 251.
Long life narrow way, He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives within my heart. All the world around me I see His loving care. Though my heart grows weary, I never will despair. I know that He is leading through stormy paths. The days of weary will come at last. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart. Oh Christian, lift up your voice and sing eternal hallelujah. Jesus the King, the hope of all who seek Him, the help of all who find Him. So loving, so good and kind. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart.
May I invite you to move up so we'll be closer to the speaker. It's my honor and privilege once again to welcome Dr. Craig to our presentation this afternoon. Professor Craig is Professor Emeritus of Nutrition at Andrews University. And he is also an adjunct professor of public health at Loma Linda University. He has taught nutritional biochemistry and public health nutrition for the past 40 years. He received his PhD degree from the University of Queensland, Australia in 1971, and an MPH degree in 1975 from Loma Linda University. He has been a member of American Society for Nutrition since 1985 and a member of Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for the last 33 years. Dr. Craig has conducted nutrition seminars and lectures on nutrition in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and various countries in Europe, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He has authored over 45 articles for scholarly journals, 10 books, and 300 articles for health publication. He edited the book Vegetarian Nutrition and Wellness in 2018. In 2009 and again in 2016, he co-authored the position paper on vegetarian diets for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. His research interests include the nutritional adequacy and health benefits of a plant-based diet. It was an impressive bio. Dr. Craig, we welcome you once again, and the time is yours.
Thank you very much for your coming back to part 2. And as you've heard, I've been around nutrition books and the literature on nutrition for a few years, trying to synthesize topics and subject matter of interest to Adventists and others. And I take the words of Hippocrates, the great Greek physician who said millennia ago, let food be your medicine, and medicine be your food, or whatever, I forget. I think it was just let food be your medicine. So I want to launch with that beginning into a discussion, and this is what my lecture is all about. On the left-hand side, you see the food groups, the plant food groups, fruits and vegetables, legumes, including soy. Some people think when you say beans, soya beans is all there is, but no. There's 20, 30 different legumes that all have good nutritional value, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and then herbs and spices. It's not a food group, but we added in there because of the value that they provide. So across the top you see 3 major chronic diseases: cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes, which plagues most of Western society today, causing great expenditures and lost work time because of these illnesses. And an X there means that that food group helps in the amelioration or the prevention of that disease. And what do you notice? The first question is always a no-brainer. What do you notice about that chart? How many boxes have an X in them? So every food group contributes to the protection against those chronic diseases. And I'm not just throwing the dart on the board. There are hundreds of research papers, and I'm not joking, hundreds, to validate those X's. Not each X, but collectively there's probably well over 1,000 or 2,000 or more research papers to show that these food groups provide protection. And Brother David has only given me 45 minutes to cover those 2,000 papers. So I'm not going to cherry pick, but I'm going to give you something which is a consensus of where scientists believe things are at. So we'll launch from there. So let's, before we get started, I just want to remember that the form of the food is very important. Here's one example of a food, potato, and you'll notice that if you eat the baked potato or if you eat the processed potato, what a difference it makes. So when we talk about food, let's not forget that the more likely you eat it as a whole food, the more likely you're going to get the benefits. When you process it and heavily process it, today we have the terminology ultra-processed foods. And the French fries would be definitely in that category. You can see just one thing, and that is the calories. Look at the difference in calories. So while a baked potato is healthy and nutritious, the fries, you're getting 3 times the calories. Okay, so we're going to look at fruits and vegetables and look at those 3 diseases. First of all, cancer. You'll see on the left the different types of cancers, and then the numbers represent the reduction in the risk of you getting cancer from eating green vegetables, and that the line represents different cancers. And here you have a low intake versus a medium intake, or a medium intake versus a low intake, and then a high intake. So going from your left to right, you're going from a small intake to a high intake. And as you follow those arrows from left to right, what do you notice about the numbers? They all get bigger, right? Which means the more vegetables you eat, the more you're protected. It's as simple as that. Now, the numbers will vary all over the map because some are Italian, some are Greek, some are British, some are American. I mean, they're all over the place. But the important point is the general trend is the more vegetables that we eat, in this case green vegetables, the more protection you have. Okay, this is a British study, and you'll see, again, looking at high consumption of fruits and vegetables versus a low consumption. And what are the numbers that are given here? All-cause of mortality is reduced, 33%. Cancer mortality is decreased, 25%. Cardiovascular mortality is decreased, 31%. It's a win-win situation. Eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, and mortality is decreased, and this is adjusted for all kinds of things. Okay, this is breast cancer. This is a Greek study. The earlier one I showed you was an Italian study. This Greek study, if you can see the green represents eating 4 to 5 servings of vegetables a day, compared to the blue, which is less than 2. So again, it's high versus low. And what do you notice to the bars? In the green bar, the bar is shortened, which means your risk is diminished. It's diminished, if you look at the numbers, about 45%. Going to the fruits, the red is 6 servings a day of fruit. That's a high level, but you had 1 or 2 for lunch today and a banana for breakfast, some raisins. I mean, it's easy to add up 4, 5, 6 servings. And you can see it's like 35% reduction in risk of breast cancer eating a high intake versus eating a low intake. So forget about all the numbers. The importance is the trend. High intake compared to a low intake, you have greater protection. Okay, this was a study that I was involved with. My wife and I went to Argentina, to Universidad del Plata, or WAP as they call it, and scientists there at the med school were looking at prostate cancer in Diamante nearby. And you'll notice 3 times a week of eating fruit, the risk of prostate cancer was only 1/3. Red fruit, it was only 1/4 as much. Okay, so greater protection in the red fruits. Vegetables, it's about 50% reduction. Physical activity, also 50% reduction. So eating your fruits and vegetables, men, we saw women with breast cancer, now men with prostate cancer. Eat fruits and vegetables, and your rate is cut in half. In the case of red fruit, it was even more than that. Okay, berries. Berries are the best source of the pigment we call anthocyanins. This gives you the blues and reds and purples in the plant world, and so your raspberries and blueberries and plums and cherries, which aren't berries, but they also have that same pigment, the anthocyanins. These are cancer protective. This particular pigment is one of the most potent antioxidants in the plant kingdom. So it's a good thing to have a serving of berries every day. Whatever you like, blueberries, raspberries, or cherries, whatever you can afford. Okay, this is another research paper. Blueberries contain a particular flavonoid, pterostilbene, which suppresses colon cancer. Oops. So this was work that was done at Loma Linda, and they showed that risk of prostate cancer is reduced 40% from eating tomatoes every day compared to eating very little, if any, tomatoes. And as you see down the bottom, other foods that have that red pigment are guava and watermelon and red papaya, so it's not just tomatoes. This is a paper on onions, and it shows you the level of flavonoids, which are antioxidants in the food. The ones on the left are the strong, bitey onions. The ones over on the right, which are Vidalia and Walla Walla sweets, and those onions that don't have much kick in them. Well, it's the flavonoids, these antioxidants, that are cancer protective. So if you try to avoid the onions that have a bit of kick, you're actually diminishing the goodness. The same with broccoli and other vegetables. Kids say, I don't like the taste of it. Well, it's that flavor, which is the thionocyanate class of compounds, which taste a little bitter, but they're the ones that are cancer protective. So trying to move towards blah tasting foods isn't necessarily the best thing. It's good to have that bit of flavor there. Okay, now that was cancer. Now let's look at diabetes. I have one paper here. This is a paper that shows that the risk of type 2 diabetes is decreased 14% by regularly consuming green leafy vegetables. Fruits or other vegetables, there's no protection for diabetes generally. It's the green leafy vegetables. Okay, now looking at cardiovascular disease, the picture shows at the top the incidence of stroke eating. This is not very many, only 3 servings a day. Compared to few, if any, you can see reduction in stroke almost 30%, mortality from stroke over 40%, cardiovascular mortality almost 30%, and all cause of mortality decreased 15%. So eating fruits and vegetables helps not only protect against cancer and against diabetes, but here you can see also against cardiovascular disease. And this is one picture that shows one of the effects, and that is it helps to lower your cholesterol. 4 or more servings a day of fruit and vegetable versus the red, which is only 1 to 2 servings. And you can see the higher intake, the green represents 6% for men and 8% reduction for women. So these are not statin-like reductions, but they certainly help, regularly keep that up, and all the other foods they also contribute and combine. This was a Dutch study, over 20,000 middle-aged people. They found that those who had the highest intake of fruits and vegetables, the risk of heart disease, you can't see the number too well, but it's 34% reduction. Okay? And whether the food was raw or cooked or processed did not seem to change the direction of the numbers or significantly the magnitude of the numbers. This was another study looking at 52 countries, mostly in Europe, those that were consuming the typical Western diet, which is like meat and potatoes, fried foods, so forth. The risk is, this is 35% increased risk of heart attack compared to those who were eating a prudent diet, which we call one that's rich in fruit and vegetable, 30% reduction of heart attack, okay, compared to those who were eating hardly any fruit and vegetable. So the picture is very consistent. And we have the recommendation from the government and many health organizations. In the States, they vary slightly throughout the world, but the recommendation is 5 servings a day of vegetables and 4 servings a day of fruit, giving you 9 servings a day of fruit and vegetable. That's the recommendation. And I think you can see from the last 5 minutes that if we do that, we have a good running chance to have significant reduction in diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Okay, so that's the first group, fruit and vegetable. Now we go down to the next layer, which was the legumes, which have the beans and lentils. And again, I want to emphasize we're not just talking about soya bean. You know, the public is soya bean is the halo bean. Well, it does have certain unique characteristics, but all of the beans can provide protection. And here we see that the risk of getting cancer is reduced from about 50%. These numbers, the odds ratio, the numbers are around 0.4, 0.5, so that's a 50 or 60% reduction. And as you can see, this is similar for lentils. Lentils are legumes, so we're not just talking about beans. And the risk of cancer, as summarized, about a 30 to 60% reduction. Okay, this is a China study, and this is looking at type 2 diabetes, T2TD, and you can see this is the one that we're comparing it with. So a bar that is lower than that means a reduction in risk. So if we go to all legumes, this is a 38% reduction in risk. Soya beans is more, it's 47%, peanuts 20%, and so forth. Soya milk 40%. So in general, the legumes cause not only a reduction in risk of cancer, but you can see a reduction when you compare a high intake versus a low intake. For example, shown down here, 5th quintile versus the 1st quintile, 65 grams versus 12. So that's a high intake versus a low intake. There is protection against diabetes. Okay, cardiovascular disease, looking at the National Health and Nutrition Survey, which we call NHANES in this country, done by the government. Here they were tracking nearly 10,000 people. They found that those who ate legumes almost daily, 4 times a week, had 22% reduction in risk of heart disease compared to those who ate beans pretty well never. Black beans are even better, 1/3 of a cup per day, 38% reduction in risk of heart attack. So legumes also, it's the polyunsaturated fats, the high level of fiber, and other characteristics in the bean that provide. The beans also are rich in phytonutrients, and the ones that have colourful skins like black and red and brown and yellow, you get the extra benefit from the phytonutrients. Okay, if we can have it, okay. Moving then to grains, whole grains, you can see this was a study, famous nurses study done in Boston, and those who ate whole grains versus white bread, white grains, you can see coronary heart disease, stroke and diabetes all reduced in the 20s, 30s and almost 40%. So again, the whole grains are rich in fiber and different polyphenolics or antioxidants that provide the protection. And why do we emphasize that the grains must be whole? It's because during the refining, the grain is made up of 3 parts: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. The endosperm is the starchy part. The bran, of course, is the fiber, and the germ is what produces the new life. And it's the bran and the germ where most of the micronutrients are. It's the protein and starch is in the endosperm. So when you refine the whole grain, whether it's rice or wheat or barley or whatever it is, this is what happens. You lose 75% of the vitamins and minerals, 90% of the fiber, and a whacking load of the phytochemicals or phytonutrients. So you're losing a tremendous amount of the micronutrients that fuel a lot of the important enzymes and processes in the body. And this is just one example of whole wheat versus refined wheat, the unique phytochemical or antioxidant that's there is ferulic acid. This is what grains are specially noted for, ferulic acid. You can see the level, about 500 parts per million, and in white bread it's about 40 parts per million. That represents, according to my calculations, 92% loss. So all of that bran and germ that's given to feed the hogs and the cattle and so forth, and we end up with the white fluffy breakfast cereals for our children, and it's, you know, depleted sometimes, unless of course you're using the whole grain. This is a study that basically says the same effect for cancer is seen, and cardiovascular is seen with diabetes. Notice this: brown rice, in a number of studies, is associated with about a 10-12% decrease in risk of type 2 diabetes, while eating white rice regularly increases. So here you can see, just switching from white rice to whole grain rice, you reverse your risk from being high to being low. Okay? The author suggests that at least 2 servings of whole grains a day should be consumed to reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes. Oops, I think we missed, did we miss one? Yeah, cancer. And you can see here a summary of 40 different studies, the average 20 to 50% reduction compared to high consumption of whole grains versus low consumption of whole grains. And again, this is just to remind us that there are fiber and different phytochemicals in the bran which provide the protection. Okay, so enough about whole grains. Let's go now to the next category, and you had a lecture on this recently, nuts. So this, for some of you, this will be a revision, but here's your bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol that we don't want to go up. And these graphs show you the decrease that happens when you eat a serving of nuts, okay? And you already know a serving is basically what you can put in your hand, whether it's walnuts, pecans, macadamias, peanuts, you know, whatever you like. I suggest, you know, if I told you one of the nuts was the best, I've lost 80% of you because it won't be the nut that you like. That's terrible education to say, you know, let's just pick one. Let's say pecans. Pecans are the best, and 80% of you don't like pecans. Well, I've lost my message. But the true story is all the nuts are good because they all have phytosterols and polyphenolics and the good fat, monounsaturated fat. So the most benefit is for those with the highest LDL. See, above 160, when you take nuts, wow, 10% reduction. For those who have better cholesterol levels, you only get 3% reduction. But it works for everybody. That's the good news. It doesn't matter whether you are at risk or not at risk of heart disease. Taking nuts will provide you benefit. Okay, this is a Harvard study, and it shows that as you eat nuts more frequently, your chance of mortality from heart disease drops. The numbers are going from right to left. In summary of a number of studies, this shows that the red bar represents a value for rarely eating nuts, and the blue bar represents eating nuts more than 4 times a week. And you can see almost 40% reduction in risk of heart disease by eating nuts every day. That's not hard. I know it costs a little money, but it's a good investment. An average reduction of 8.3% for each serving of nuts per week. It's good. Okay, and this paper summarizes the different nuts, you know, and this is where you can scan down and say, oh, there's my nut. Well, like I said, don't try to look at this and say, wow, walnuts are the best because they have the greatest reduction. some of these studies were done on normal cholesteremic people, some were done on people with elevated cholesterol, some were done on this age, some on that age, some in this country, some on that country. You know, people, we're all diverse, so we can't strictly compare all of these. The main thing is that all the nuts show a decrease in your bad blood lipids. Okay, so whatever you like, promise me that you'll go to the store after sundown and buy some and start eating them, whatever it is, because it's good. Okay, this is diabetes, and here you see from left to right, eating them more frequently, less than once a week over to here daily, and you'll see these lines for all the different study, the Boston study, the China study, and this is another Boston study. They're all going downhill. The more you eat, the lower your risk of diabetes. Oops, we missed, here we are. So eating nuts 1 to 4 times a week, your risk is decreased about 15%. Eating nuts almost daily, it's at nearly up to 30%. And good old peanut butter almost every day gives you a 20% reduction in what? Diabetes. Okay? Okay, so some people say, no, not for me, nuts. Too many calories. I can't do that. Or some of us, you know, calories don't hurt, but I realize that is a problem. But okay, so I went to my food composition book and I looked up some of the foods that people are eating, fast foods and other things, and look at them all here. Commonly eaten foods, they're all 150 to 300 to 400 calories. An ounce of nuts, which is no small serving, an ounce, has less than 200 calories. So please, I don't want anybody telling me when I walk out the door, we can't eat nuts, too many calories, because the data is just not there. They don't stand out way above everything else. Okay, this again is the national government survey, NHANES group, and here's we're comparing nut consumers and non-consumers, those that don't eat nuts, throughout the country, east to west. And what do you notice? Body weight. The non-consumers are heavier. Abdominal obesity is more amongst the non-consumers. Hypertension is more. Systolic blood pressure is higher. So the national data shows that nuts don't cause people to put on weight and their blood pressure is lower and so forth. So, okay, just a word about a seed, sesame. Okay, strong antioxidants. They have a series of compounds called lignans, and these are very protective against breast cancer, but they also lower blood lipids and blood pressure, okay, and have protective effects of cancer. So eating your hummus or eating tahini on your toast, like I like to do, with sliced banana, you get the benefits of the lignans. Okay, and then the last group we're going to talk about, I hope we haven't run over time. What time is it? It's not 3 o'clock yet, is it? Oh, okay. We've got time for Q&A. Okay, you like Q&A? Yeah. That's where I learn a lot. You know, you come here thinking you're going to learn something from me, but I came here to learn from you during the Q&A. Okay, so people don't think of spices and herbs other than flavoring their food. It turns a roast or an entree or a breakfast cereal or whatever it is from something blah into something good. Well, the spices and herbs certainly do that. Putting rosemary on your baked potato or putting cumin in your soup or whatever you like to do. And garlic, of course, it's universal. It goes everywhere. At least the Puerto Ricans tell me that. So, you know, we have our favorite flavorings, and that's how you often distinguish Italian from Mexican from Greek food, is the seasonings. And if you travel in India, each village has their their own curry, their own special formula. Okay, so this is well known, but what we often forget is these culinary secrets also provide protection. And that's the same three things we've talked about. What were they? Cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. There are herbs and there are spices that actually provide protection. Now, the protection is somewhat restrained because we don't eat large quantities of these, just small amounts, half a teaspoon or half a clove or 2 cloves, depending on your culture, whatever. But I wanted to show you here that cancer protective, there's a bunch, we'll talk about these in more detail. Cardiovascular problems can be managed by different spices, and blood sugars, or glycemic control as scientists call it, there are different spices that can help in that direction. So let's just take 5 minutes to talk about these, and then we'll have Q&A. Okay, if we can go click again. I think this is one of those crazy things that takes forever to load. A bit, some more, yet more. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, so against cardiovascular disease, there's a number, but these are 4 that stand out to me: garlic, onions, turmeric, and ginger. And I've pictured them over here, and the name that I've written on top of them is the phytochemical or the phytonutrient that provides that protection. So I'm not just spinning in the air and thinking, garlic is good. Scientists have actually identified chemicals that the Creator put in that spice, and we have been able to do experiments and show that that particular chemical provides that protection. So with garlic, it's allied sulfides. With onions, it's flavonoids. Turmeric, the bright yellow color that we use to flavor tofu and rice and other things, is curcumin. And then with ginger, it's the gingerols. So these things all can lower your blood lipids or prevent oxidation of cholesterol, which doesn't sound like it's very significant, but this is the main step in plaque formation that develops towards a blockage and causing a stroke or a heart attack. So, okay, we need to click 3 or 4 more times. These are the ones that lower your blood lipids that we mentioned. I think we've added a couple of others. Psyllium, which is Metamucil. You're all familiar with that, which a lot of people take for bowel problems, but it actually lowers cholesterol very nicely. The ones that lower the risk of having blood clots, again, garlic, ginger, turmeric, and onions. These all inhibit platelet aggregation and thrombosis. And then there's a bunch that we know protect against cancer. And the Lamiaceae herbs is a big family. And the Apiaceae herbs, also a big family of seasoning herbs that we commonly use in our various food preparations. And again, these are not just suspicions. We know the chemistry behind these, and in many cases we know the mechanism that is stimulated or blocked, enzymes that are blocked that are involved with cancer clearance or cancer formation when a compound connects to the DNA and causes the cell to go wacko. There are certain chemicals that actually step into that process and block it. So there are blocking and there are facilitating agents that work, and these are all, if we can see in the next picture, just to remind you of some of these that, they can grow on your windowsill or in your backyard. There's no magic. These are easy to grow. Even someone with a black thumb can grow them, as my wife can testify. In Michigan, we were able to grow a number of these, and while she takes care of the tomatoes and corn and cucumbers, I can look after the herbs because they're so easy to grow, and I'm so clumsy in the garden. It works that way. And the next picture shows you the Apiaceae herbs, and these are again, got the chemicals that we know that are active. So cilantro, parsley, cumin, dill, these are all known in the literature to contain anti-cancer agents. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that if you once a week add these to your meal, you're never going to get cancer. No, we're not saying that. We're saying that if you use these things, you will lower the risk, the potential for getting cancer. There are many factors that cause cancer. As you know, people who don't smoke or who exercise and eat healthfully still get cancer because there are many things in the environment that are involved, not just food. Okay, the garlic shows that it's good for the GI tract, significant reduction of stomach cancer and colon cancer. And this is one of our favorites, curcumin. Maybe I've got 1 minute to tell a story because my wife's father, my father-in-law, used to love, he grew up with egg. And so when he came to the United States to visit us, my wife prepared this beautiful dish of scrambled tofu with flavored with onion and colored with the curcumin. Oh boy, did he love that. He thought that was awesome. After he finished it all, he asked, so what was this? Because he thought surely it was egg. And it was very difficult to keep a straight face to tell him it was not. So it's possible to create lookalikes that can be healthy and nutritious and that have interesting spices added to them. And that was the chemical curcumin up in the top right-hand corner. So moving to diabetes, these are just 4 major ones. Fenugreek, which is commonly used in India, and bitter melon, which is Chinese and West Indian used mostly, although these things are available here, but different ethnic groups use them more commonly. The Spanish or the Central Americans more likely use prickly pear. In Nepal or when I was in Peru, they invited me, come down and look at my tuna farm. I thought, man, I didn't know you were growing fish here. He didn't hear me. I didn't say that loud. I just thought in my head. So I went down, and here was a field of prickly pear. And this was the tuna that they ate. And you can see there the fruit, very delicious. And it's both the, forget the name of it now, but the fruit and the blade there are rich in fiber, which is very helpful in lowering blood sugar levels. And then, of course, there's cinnamon. On the next picture, I think is some of the data here. I think this came from Pakistan, showing a teaspoon of cinnamon a day lowered fasting blood glucose about 20%. 2 teaspoons about 30%, whereas a placebo was nothing. So this was one of the earliest studies. The water extract of the cinnamon actually contains some catechins which are helpful in moderating the glycemic effect. This was another study, I don't know if this was in China, but HbA1c is the measure of your long-term blood glucose, and normal levels are below 5.7%. These were people that were above 7, so they were clearly diabetic, and they were given, half of them were given a gram of cinnamon a day, and the other half were not given anything. And those that were given the cinnamon, their HbA1c, which I said was the long-term reflection of the blood sugar control, it decreased 10% after 90 days. So again, the little bit of cinnamon has therapeutic value for those at risk of diabetes. And this was done with a rice pudding, adding 2 teaspoons of cinnamon to the batch of pudding, and you can see that after 2 hours, the blood sugar was only about a half of what it would be without the cinnamon. So, this seems to be a useful process. So we come back to where we started. I think you'll agree with me. We've shown you scientific literature for these 4 food groups, and the food flavourings that in each of these situations they provide protection. And you'll notice there's no animal foods up there. You know, the meat and the dairy, particularly the meat, will increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancer. And maybe next year we could give another lecture with all that data to show that you compare a vegetarian with a non-vegetarian and it's just the same picture all the way through. The vegetarian is protected because they're eating these plant foods. There's nothing magic about the word vegetarian, that's just a label we give. But the person who eats these, and you can be a meat eater and still get I'm sorry, I wave my arms around. You can be a meat eater and still get the benefit of these. It's the balance, the very little meat that's eaten and the abundance of diet that comes from this is going to be overall protective. So those of us who are vegetarian, you know, we're eating the foods which provide us with maximum protection, good health, good nutrition. So when you put all those foods together, as we've said, we call that vegetarian. And I've written a number of position papers for the Academy, which is our big organisation in Chicago, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And every 5 or 6 years we put out a position paper. 2009 and 2016 I was the author, and we've summarised in those papers with much literature, although we're restricted in how many literature responses we can give, but we show that blood lipids decreased, heart disease mortality decreased, blood pressure and hypertension decreased, diabetes rates decreased, body weights decreased, and cancer, some cancers, not all cancers, are reduced. And that's not because you wear that label, but because you're eating those foods, those plant foods which contain protective, better fats, phytochemicals. So I just finished with this picture that I see on the notice board. We'll give an announcement for next week. Dr. DeSantos will be here to talk about blue zones. And Dan Buettner was the one who wrote this up in National Geographic. And this quote is right out of his book. Beans, whole grains and garden vegetables, 4 to 6 servings a day, are the cornerstone of all the blue zones, the longevity people. That's what he says. He's not an Adventist. He's just looked around the world and found these places where people live to a long, long, long age, and this is the summary statement that he makes, which I think is very interesting. So in my conclusion, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and beans prepared simply with herbs and healthy spices, tasty and nutritious, and they lower the risk of many chronic diseases and lower mortality rates. And I think I finish up by saying it's not only good for me and for you, but it's good for the planet. It's good for the planet. It's good for sustainability. And that's the big buzzword in nutrition and health right now, is the carbon footprint, sustainability. How much water, how much land, how much pesticide, how much Earth's resource, how much fossil fuel is used to grow the food in the field, to transport it, to put it on your table. And the foods vary greatly. Some are water guzzlers, some are not, and so forth. You know, I did recently a research paper on plant beverages, and you know, I discovered in my research that oat milk has a very small footprint, whereas almond milk is a very big carbon footprint, for reasons that we could explain some other time or in Q&A if you're interested. But you'll notice here, greenhouse gas emissions, these are all plant foods. The high greenhouse gas emissions, what are they? They're all the animal foods. So these are not only unhealthy for us, but they're unhealthy for the environment. These plant foods are not only healthy for us, they're better for the environment because they produce less greenhouse gas, use less water etc. And when you put it all together, I think this is my last picture. This is the vegan diet, the vegetarian, the fish eating, low meat, and so forth. And you see that the vegetarians, they reduce the greenhouse gases by about 50% compared to the high meat eating. And just cutting down your meat from over 100 grams a day to less than 50 a gram, that's the low, this is the high, you're saving the earth because there's a 35% reduction. The cow is the most, well, it's the worst in terms of environmental sustainability, and that can be discussed at another time. So this is my message for the day. The different plant foods provide different protection, different mechanisms, different chemicals are in them, but taken as a whole, we can have reduction in major chronic diseases, and what's good for me is good for the planet, which I think we need to be doing our best to save it for the grandchildren. Okay, that's it. So the remaining time, you can ask questions or make comments or snide remarks or anything you want to. I can't guarantee I can give an answer. We hope we haven't confused you. But yeah, I think there's a roving mic, isn't there, going to be? This morning during Sabbath school we had somebody who had Nike shoes on, I think. They were running here and there, capturing every question. So I hope you're also athletic. You can dart around and catch every question. Okay.
Hi, I'd like to know about cashew. Is cashew a nut?
Yeah, cashew is considered a nut, and its nutritional profile fits just almost exactly it. I know it grows unusually on the outside of the fruit, whereas most of the nuts are in a shell or something, but in terms of nutritional content, it matches. And the same with peanut. Peanut is really a legume. It grows under the ground, and in fact, in Africa, when we lived there, we discovered that the locals call it ground nut. We wondered what they were talking about, but then we realized that they associate it with the ground. So the peanut, even though it's a legume, is like cashew. It has a nutritional profile with unsaturated fat and fiber levels and micronutrients that match.
So what is it?
Excuse me?
The nut, what is cashew is a nut, right?
Yeah, cashew's a nut. I'm sorry, I was just mentioning the peanut, but forget that. That's just confusing you.
This is maybe a little bit off topic, but what about brewer's yeast flakes? I was raised on them, and I think they help control my cholesterol, but I read or heard just recently that there's some concern about, now everybody knows, but brain damage. So do you have any information on brewer's yeast flakes?
This is not off topic. Anything that we eat is included in Q&A. I'm not sure that I'm up to date with all the nuances that you're mentioning, but brewer's yeast, I think, falls now under the classification of nutritional yeast that people use for their, I was waiting for my wife yesterday in Riverside, and I just looked around and there was a Clark, so I went in there just to have a look, see what they had, and I noticed the row of different nutritional yeast, which is a big difference from what it was 20 years ago. Just about every nutritional yeast now has incredible nutritional profile, and it's for vegans, I guess it's a good source of B12 and other vitamins and so forth. So it's become very popular because vegan diet has now become very popular. But referring to what the question specifically, I honestly don't know of any connection. I don't know whether it's social media that's popularized this idea, or sometimes there's one paper that says something and people will pick up on it and make it trumpet that as if the whole world should accept and follow this, and yet there may be 99 other papers that negate this idea, but those don't count. It's this one paper that I want everybody to know about. And the same thing happened with tofu. The literature is just full of benefits of soy, but there was one study that was done in Hawaii that showed from autopsies that these people who had been eating tofu had atrophy of the brain. And so they said, well, this causes brain shrinkage. Well, there's a lot of ifs and buts about this story because it was autopsies. We don't know what else they were eating. But subsequently, studies have been conducted that show that the use of soy, rather than diminishing brain acuity, there may be some slight increase. So people don't want to know about those. They just want to point to this one study which has some clouds over it because of the nature it was conducted, and prove that soy makes you whatever you want to say, ... So we have to be careful. I'm not saying that what you're asking falls into this category, and because I haven't heard about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist out there, but I'd need to check it out, and I can get back to you if you give me your email. If you want to know, I'll do some research on it for you. Okay.
Is peanut the least nutritionist nut? Peanuts, is that the least nutritionist one? Peanuts. Yeah, is that the least nutritionist nut? What nut is the least nutritionist one? Peanuts.
The nutritional value of peanuts, how does it compare with other nuts? No? Is that your question?
Is it the least nutritionist nut, peanuts, of all the nuts?
The problem with peanuts is that they often come from the hot, humid southeast of the United States, which is like Georgia, Remember Jimmy Carter from peanut country, So there are certain molds that grow in hot, humid, and we know that aflatoxin grows well, and this is a cancer-causing substance. So in the past, peanuts have often been given a bad name because of their association with this, but companies today that make peanut butter, they have to select their peanuts that are number one, US grade number one, so that problem shouldn't exist if they are being regulated. So that's the bad press. But you're asking about the nutritional profile, and the nutritional profile, it's not kicked around in the gutter compared to the other nuts. If that's what you like, if you like peanut butter rather than almond butter or tahini, then whatever. If you don't like peanut butter, you're not missing anything. There's so many choices we have in this country. So many choices. We're so blessed. We've lived in Africa, and we've traveled to Eastern Communist Europe, and we've been to Latin America, and all I can say is we are blessed in this country with the choices and opportunities for good nutrition we have here. Yeah.
About 2 years ago, I was watching, during the first pandemic, I was watching this called 10th Generation Dairy Farmer as a young kid. And he was making the feed for his cows. And he says, And all of a sudden, you made a statement that really hit me because I've seen a lot of Adventists or a lot of media years say, "Oh, you vegetarians, you're so sickly or whatever." And I know some that were, and I wondered why. And this young kid said, "Everybody knows the soil's depleted. You really need. We add trace minerals to the feed to the cows that they get all the trace minerals." And what it hit me is, I've heard about hydroponic foods are lacking a lot of the trace minerals, and the foods that you get are grown in soils, organic soils, they do better. So I was just wondering, towards nutrition, do Christians know that you really want to get food grown in the soil so you get all the trace minerals and not just the few trace minerals that make the plants grow?
Okay,
I was just wondering, you know, if you've done any studies where hydroponically grown foods versus like organic foods grown in the soil, if there's any studies that show that it really does, it's more nutritious than the ones hydroponically grown.
yeah, I don't know about hydroponic, but we buy, if we're not at home, where we grow our own tomatoes, but we buy from stores that are vine grown, not hydroponic tomatoes. All the fruits we buy come off trees. The nuts we buy come off trees, so there may be hydroponic stuff out there, but it's not on my plate, and I don't. You know, the U.S. government has analysed all the foods that are available online in the USDA.gov food banks, and they do analyse not only the phytonutrients, but a lot of the trace minerals like selenium and copper and zinc and molybdenum and so forth. And from what I read and other people who write commentaries on it, the soil depletion is not as significant as it might be described by some. All plants require different nutrients, of course, and they're not always trace elements. There are two particular ones, iodine and selenium, which plants tend to concentrate, and so when the soil is low, the plants that grow in them are low. And when the soil is high, the plants are high. Selenium is the same way. We know where grains come from in the United States just by measuring their selenium level, because selenium tends to be higher in the Dakotas and down through Nebraska. But all the research I've read, I don't know of vegetarians being at risk of getting sick because of trace mineral deficiency. It's just not a reality that crosses my reading and observation. It seems like, you know, the best source of trace minerals tends to be whole grains, and if people are eating white bread, white rice, white sugar, white everything, blanco, you know, till the chickens come home, then of course they're going to be deficient in trace minerals. But if you're eating whole grain products, then you should be getting your chromium and selenium and zinc and copper and so forth. Okay?
Okay, I have a question. The Bible says that John the Baptist, he ate locust. Do you know if locust was a plant or was that animal?
My understanding that this was the locust bean, which is carob. So he was eating honey and carob, which is, you know, the carob bean has protein and high carbohydrate. And, you know, sometimes in Scripture, the verses are not always precisely saying exactly, but it's a metaphor or it's symbolic. Just like Israel was the land flowing with milk and honey. It's not flowing with milk and honey, and I don't believe it was then, but that was a metaphor for abundance. When there's honey, that means there's a lot of flowering plants, and bees are busy, okay? When there's milk, that's also different from a desert. So a land flowing with milk and honey was symbolic of abundance compared to the wilderness, and eating honey and carob bean, in my heart, I don't believe that's all he ate. I believe that was a symbol that his life was like his clothing. Simple, basic, nothing flashy. So I don't think, you may argue differently, but I don't think he was eating grasshoppers.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that maybe, there's a tendency nowadays that they want to push bugs on us. And I was thinking, okay, if they say locust is biblical because God fed John the Baptist with it, so it's okay for us. Well, nowadays there are factories that produce crickets and so on, different kind of worms, and they say that's going to be our nutrition because it's good for environment.
Well, I'm not going to knock locusts or grasshoppers because in parts of Africa where there is protein malnutrition, they actually feed locusts or grasshoppers, and that makes a significant contribution to their nutritional. I'm not saying or recommending it here, I'm just saying that in different parts of the world, for different reasons, not everybody, for example, that lives up in the Arctic maybe could be vegetarian unless they ship in things. They may have to eat animal products. So each geographical area needs to make their own choice as to what is beneficial and healthy for their nutritional status. In this country, like I said before, we have so many choices that we're not restricted by these sort of things. But thank you for your question. All good questions. They show that we are struggling with everything we hear and see, and not everything's straightforward, and we have to make some judgment calls sometimes. Yes, question over here.
I have a question on fish eating. Is eating fish really good for our diet? Because we know that it may not necessarily be something bad, but there are many fish that are not. It's not that they are not edible, but they sort of feed at the ocean floor, feed on the ocean floor or off the ocean floor. And as a result, they're not, like, I eat fish, but when I go to buy fish, I have to jump on my phone and check where does this fish eat, where does it get its food. Is it feeding above the ocean floor, on the ocean floor? So what do you think about that? Because now, when I was growing up, there are certain things we didn't eat. They may be like barracuda and that sort of thing. We just didn't eat those. People knew better. But there are fish that looks like the real deal now. They have fins, scales, everything. But you're just not supposed to eat them. You're not supposed to eat them because they may not be sharks or barracudas or some of the well-known evil ones in the sea, but they're just not good fish. They're not good. They will increase your maybe diabetic level, whatever. They will just not. They're not good for your health. Just the mere fact of where they feed, and I'm concerned about that. I'm reducing my fish eating just for that reason. What do you say about that?
Good question, like all of them. You've partly answered your own question, I think, as I followed you along, that chickens and cows are in the same category. The cow that is put in a stall and cramped up and can't run the field and is force-fed is not the same as the cow that runs in the range. The chicken that has its beak clipped and its toenails clipped and everything and is cramped in this little cage for its life and force-fed with the lights turned on all the time is laying an egg. It's not the same quality as the chicken that runs around in the same way you've described the fish, that different fish that eating algae and whatever, and others that are eating muck or whatever. And so it doesn't take much to realize that when things are grown under unnatural conditions, they're more likely to be less healthy than those that are free-ranging and living on cleaner things. So then you ask the question about a fish necessary. There's nothing in fish that a vegetarian can't get from somewhere else. The fish oils, the omega-3, are the only thing that might stand out among them, but there are omega-3s that are available in the plant kingdom, and there's no research that shows that a vegetarian has any symptoms or propensity to a disease because of omega-3 deficiency. The omega-3 being the type of fat that's found uniquely in salmon and other fish. So is fish necessary for the diet? The American recommendations are we should have 2 servings a week, but that's for the general population. If you translate that to vegetarian, then the only thing that why it's recommended 2 servings a week is to get the omega-3. But if you get walnuts and flax and some soy and other things that have omega-3 every day, then there's no data that shows that you're in a deficiency. If you come from a culture that relies on fish, like northern Norway, I'm not going to say to them, no, fish are bad for you. I mean, if this is what they eat, their culture demands it, and they can't get other foods, let them choose what they want. I'm not going to tell them. But so what I'm saying is fish does play an important part in a person's diet, but it doesn't have to, because there are many other things that can substitute. Protein we can get from many things. The omega-3 we can get from other things. So, you know, it's a personal choice. You know, there are pesco vegetarians that eat mostly plants but occasionally eat fish, and their health parameters are not as good as vegetarians but are better than meat eaters. So clearly fish is a lot better than red meat, but yeah. Okay? I guess they're wanting to go home.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. And now we've learned a lot about a vegetarian diet. From now on, as the topic shows, food as medicine. So from now on, take less medicine and eat more food. Let's pray. Our gracious, loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your Sabbath day. We thank you for the health message that we just heard. Help us to keep our body clean and clear, because it is the temple of God. Everything we eat and drink, do it to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.